Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Cadet Third Class Tobias Temple. It is my privilege to welcome you to the 30th Annual National Character and Leadership Symposium, and specifically the Enix Heritage Keynote Lecture featuring a cadet-moderated panel of our Air Force and Space Force senior leaders. Please join me in recognizing our generous sponsor, Lieutenant Colonel Retired Earl A. Enix, class of 1977, and Miss Candy Enix. It is now my pleasure to introduce our 4 senior leader panelists and cadet moderator. Please hold your applause until they are all introduced. Chief of Space Operations, General B. Chance Saltzman. General Saltzman serves as the senior uniformed Space Force officer responsible for the organization, training, and equipping of all organic and assigned Space Forces serving in the United States and overseas. As members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the Chief of Space Operations, and other service chiefs functions as military advisors to the Secretary of Defense, the National Security Council, and the President. Chief Master Sergeant of the Space Force, Roger A. Toberman. Chief Toberman serves as the highest enlisted level of leadership in the Space Force, and as such, provides direction for the enlisted force and represents their interests as appropriate to the American public and to those in all levels of government. He acts as the personal advisor to the Chief of Space Operations and the Secretary of the Air Force on all issues regarding the welfare, readiness, morale, proper utilization, and development of the United States Space Force. Chief Toberman is the first ever Chief Master Sergeant of the Space Force. Director of Staff, Headquarters Air Force, Lieutenant General Kevin B. Schneider. General Schneider synchronizes and integrates policy, plans, positions, procedures, and cross-functional issues for the headquarters staff. General Snyder earned his commission from the United States Air Force Academy in 1988. He is a graduate of the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program and the U.S. Air Force Weapons School. He has commanded at the squadron, group, and wing levels, to include a combat wing in the U.S. Central Command area of responsibility. His staff assignments include tours on the Joint Staff, Air Staff, U.S. Air Force's Central Command, U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, and Pacific Air Forces. The General is a command pilot with more than 4,000 flight hours in the F-16, F-15E, T-38C, and UH-1N, to include 530 combat hours. He has served in Operations Southern Watch, Enduring Freedom, Iraqi Freedom, and Inherent Resolve. Prior to his current position, Lieutenant General Schneider was the commander, United States Forces, Japan, Yokota Air Base, Japan. Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force, Joanne S. Bass. Chief Bass is the highest enlisted level of leadership in the Air Force, and as such, provides direction for the enlisted force and represents their interests as appropriate to the American public and to those in all levels of government. She serves as the personal advisor to the Chief of Staff and the Secretary of the Air Force on all issues regarding the welfare, readiness, morale, and proper utilization and progress of more than 600,000 total force airmen. Chief Bass is the 19th Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force. Finally, I am also honored to introduce today's moderator for the panel, Cadet First Class Natalie Root. Cadet Root and panelists, the floor is now yours.
So are our mics on? No? Test, test. Can y'all hear us? Mic test? Test, test. Oh, they're not going to put them all on for all of us. So what you just learned is the longer your bio is, the older you are. Right? I think yours was shortest than mine, right? Okay.
All right, I'd just like to start off today by thanking each of our panelists for taking the time to be with us here today. And with that, we'll jump into our first question. As our theme for NCLS surrounds leadership and teamwork, we would like to hear each panelist's perspective on the following question. What has been the most impactful leadership lesson you have learned during your career, and how did you implement it?
Give me a start?
Yes, sir.
It's really a tough question because in my mind, leadership lessons don't just pop into your head. It's not an epiphany, like, oh, now I get it. Now I know what leadership's about. I think a better way to describe it is that if you pay attention, leadership lessons are there's a continual barrage of leadership lessons that just wash over you every single day. The real question and the talent is, do you have the capacity to see the lesson when it hits you, to observe it, to internalize it and say, oh, yeah, I'm never gonna do that. Or I gotta remember, that's a good technique for how to get what you need. And so for me, I guess I don't have one, grand epiphany, but I will say that empowerment is one of the things that I always come back to. I just think great leaders have figured out how to empower people to do their jobs. In my mind, it's the ultimate force multiplier. But make no bones about it, empowering people is easy to say and really hard to do. It takes courage to be able to give somebody responsibility, knowing that you're accountable, and that if things go wrong, you're gonna take it on the chin. And that when you do sometimes take it on the chin, to protect that person, you don't change what you're doing. You say, keep going, keep moving. You'll get there, you'll learn from this mistake, it'll be better next time. There's lots of little skills that I think you have to acquire along the way that allows you to empower subordinates, empower teammates to get the most out of them. But that's probably the most valuable leadership lesson I've learned.
So the really cool part of this whole thing is that it gets harder to answer the questions as it goes down because the good answers get taken. But,
the next time.
And of course, I agree. Like you've got to be growing you've got to find your lessons, leadership lessons, life lessons in everything you're seeing and everything you're doing. You just have to be paying attention because that's what will give you sort of this multi-dimensional growth that's so important to be a successful human being. I think it interesting because I think if I was going to say one thing, it really nests well with the CSO's empowerment, and that's it. I was not always good at getting the most out of everyone on the team. It's really easy to lean on your rock stars. They're easy to find, they're easy to count on, and it's a pretty lazy trick, frankly, leadership trick, to just keep going to the same place. And maybe in a really resource-rich environment, you can get by doing that, but that's not an environment any of us live in anymore. A good leader will find a way to maximize the potential in every single person on the team, even knowing that that's different levels for every team member. But this refusal to stop investing in everyone, like you've just got to make sure that you're always investing in every single person, and that your goal is to maximize the individual output of everyone, not just lean on the ones that are getting on board quick. That's maybe what I would say, and obviously you do that through empowerment, and it helps. But yeah, don't leave anybody behind.
I'll give you a little bit of a preamble first, and then I'll try to answer the question. So bear with me. I make a differentiation between what I'll call capital L leadership, which is leading others, and then the lowercase l leadership, which is leading yourself. To be successful at the big one, you first have to be successful at the leading yourself piece. And it was touched on a little bit last night when Mr. Eisenman talked about self-awareness, and I think that there's a key piece of that, having some sort of introspection, looking at yourself, identifying who you are. A great boss once told me, we all have strengths and weaknesses. Figure out what our strengths, we know what our strengths are. Figure out your weaknesses and then do something about them. You all can't be one-trick ponies. Eventually we'll get exposed for it and we'll let the team down because of it. And I also believe that there is a moral, ethical, spiritual foundation. There's character involved in all of this. Again, only we can address this as individuals. And I tell you this to get to my lesson, which was when I was your age and maybe for a couple of years afterwards, I struggled with lowercase l leadership. Part of it was I chose the wrong role models and idols to emulate. And I ceded that territory in my persona to others, and I went down a wrong path. And because of that, I wasn't very effective in capital L leadership. I had a great squadron commander who gave me some words of wisdom or some pretty strong counsel one day. I think he recognized that I was going down a path I should not have been going down and helped me. And to the excellent points that were already brought up, this is just not a one-time thing, it's a continuous evolution. That would be, again, my one big takeaway is learn how to lead yourself, be men and women of character, and always look for the room for improvement within your life, and then be honest with yourself as you do that.
Good. Thanks, General Schneider. First of all, good morning. Happy Friday. Normally I'd be up here with my boss, General Brown. Unfortunately, he's got some things going on in DC, and so he's not able to be here, but I'm very excited to spend some time with my other wingman, General Schneider, who is behind the glass doors with the rest of us. If I can offer just two pieces on leadership nuggets, maybe that have stayed with me. The first one is probably carve out time to just think, right? When I was a young airman, I don't know that I ever really thought about too much except for just doing what I needed to do and to just get the job done. But as I've grown throughout my career, I've learned that one of the best things you can do to invest in yourself and help yourself be a better decision maker is just think. And in today's military environment, we really have to have folks who can critically think. Secretary Mattis talks about that when he was in the seat, which is, as leaders, we need to find time to just be in solitude so that we can think. And the other leadership nugget that I've learned throughout my career is never burn a bridge. Like, never. Maybe you don't walk across that bridge all the time, but our military is still pretty small. You never want to burn a bridge, and you want to have relationships that are enduring, that will help you get after the things that you need to get after in your career.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences regarding leadership. And for our next question, we look to Chief Bass. So we've seen a lot of evolution in the enlisted corps through our 75-year history. Mm-hmm. What are some of the biggest changes you have seen, and where are we headed with regard to enlisted force development?
Thanks for the question. Our Air Force by nature is an innovative force. We always have been. We can't get stuck on, like buzzwords or anything, right? We've been a force that always continues to innovate and advance and modernize to meet the needs that are requested of us. But some of the things that I'm really proud of, specifically over the past 3 years, that we've really worked on when it comes to force development and force development is really, we've had a focus on what does our Air Force need to look like in 2030 and beyond, and how do we grow our force to be that? We rolled out an enlisted force development action plan, and in that, and really it started off as a strategy, and then General Brown said, hey, I love everything about this, but we're not going to call it a strategy because a strategy really doesn't mean anything unless we apply some action. And the first objective in that action plan is ensure that every airman understands the threat environment. So for the past several years, for the past 30 years, we've been really focused on one AOR primarily. And so we have had a call to action to make sure that every airman, every person in this room really understands our threat environment, who our pacing challenge is, and what's at stake. So that's by and large where we're going. I am very focused on what our force of the future needs to look like. And I'm pretty vocal, especially in the Pentagon, on we have to be thoughtful on how we are going to keep talent on our bench for today, for 5 years from now, from 10 years from now, and beyond. And if we think that we're going to keep talent on the bench with like policies and processes from 1993 when I came in, then we're probably wrong, right? We've got to be good at the basics. We have to be good about standards, but we have to focus on what does our Air Force need to look like into the future, and how do we get there, and not let bureaucracy and status quo and the way we used to do business keep us from getting there.
Thank you for your answer, ma'am. At this time, I'd like to present questions from a variety of cadets who participate in various programs across the cadet wing. We respectfully request each senior leader takes turns regarding each answer.
I am C3C Quentin Kais from Cadet Squadron 33. My question is, throughout your career, how have you balanced taking care of your subordinates while also prioritizing the mission mandated by superiors?
We're just going? I'll go. So, well, I think fundamentally you have to, I think it's sort of sir, you talk about false dilemmas. I mean, you need them to get the mission done. So you can't turn your back on them, like it just doesn't work like that. Sometimes you got to work hard, right? Sometimes working hard isn't fun. You're not there to be their pal, but you're certainly this graceful accountability goes a long way. And so if you're stuck and if something really needs to get done, but it's going to be hard, or it's going to require an effort that perhaps doesn't even really feel fair to you, man, this is a lot to ask them. Well, grace goes a long way. Rolling up your sleeves and getting into it with them goes a long way. People understand. You all understand. Like, we're going to have to work hard sometimes. We're going to have to do things that, frankly, might be miserable. When we do it together, when we do it because we understand there's a greater good, I think that it's a lot easier. And all of that is easier if you don't wait for that moment to build the relationship, if you don't wait for that moment to lead. Like, you do this every day by building connection with your team that matters. So on the day you've got to ask them to give you more than they think they can, they're ready because they trust you and because they know they're in it with you.
Let me build on that a little bit. Chief, I think if you say people or mission, then you fundamentally set up a problem you can't solve. If you say people because of mission, you recognize that you can't get one done without the other. You recognize that there's an inherent synergy to people performing at their optimal best and mission satisfaction. Like, those are inextricably linked. And so, it's leadership, I think, is sometimes making the hard choices. It's choosing, and the higher you go, the less likely you are to get good, valuable options that everybody will like. It just, if they're easy decisions to make, they are made well below leadership level, certainly at our level. And so what you get at our level is really hard decisions that aren't going to be universally acceptable to everybody involved. And that's when you have to start applying principles. That's when you have to start applying mission criteria. You have to start applying things above and beyond what the normal tactical situation is. And so I just think you have to continuously account for both aspects of this. It really is a false dichotomy. It's not really a dilemma. Should I take care of my people or should I get the mission done? Like, that is not the way to phrase this. It's, you have to take care of your people because they're the only ones that can do the mission.
And I would add, I think one of the traps or challenges with leaders as they first go into leadership positions is that it's not a popularity contest, and there's maybe an unwillingness to make those tough decisions. To Sims's point, and to the CSO's point, it is you're connected between people and mission. And I think a key part of that is to be successful is communication. To have your subordinates, to have your teammates, to have others understand what it is that you're out there to do, out there to accomplish. And that communication is also a two-way street because you'll find that there are subject matter experts at all levels out there. which can help inform that decision. And then there's also the time that once the decision is made, we all move out in one direction. But again, for those that are just stepping into the first experiences of leadership, again, this is not about being the most popular person in your job. It's about getting your job done with the people that you have.
Thank you all for your perspectives. And our next question is for General Schneider.
My name is Bradley Gonzalez from Cadet Squadron 18, and my question is, being in the profession of arms means we are charged with safeguarding freedom and justice, which sometimes means taking a life. The consequences of this lethality is rarely discussed in training pipelines and commissioning sources. What counsel would you give to somebody who, by virtue of their job, may one day take a life or support the taking of a life?
It is an excellent question. I don't mean to do it injustice by taking note. This is the seventh iteration of my attempt to provide an answer to this. And it's something I have thought about. In fact, my youngest daughter may have helped her write a poli-sci paper on this. In the course of a text exchange. I'm actually going to rough up the language a little bit. At the core of what we do is the management and execution of violence. And I'm not a big fan of this phrase, I just don't have another one. At the end of the day, we're called upon, we break things and we kill people. And we deal with people that are trying to do the same to us. Do not walk away from this the thought that I'm asking people to be either inhumane or separate themselves from humanity or to have a lack of compassion. That is not the case. Men and women in uniform live in this unique paradox on both sides. Violence on one side, compassion on the other. It is a difficult place to operate. And I would say to the thesis, one of the theses of the question is that we don't do a good job of training for that. So from personal experiences, which are dated, as you heard in the intro, all my experiences when it came to the legal aspects of war, whether
updates on law of armed conflict or rules of engagement, we do a great job, sometimes too great. Last flying experience in Afghanistan, the ROE book was that thick, and I was glad I was in the Strike Eagle because the Wizzo could read it to me and we could go through all, whether we had the right clearances, and we would just, be hopeful that someone would throw out the word self-defense, which would make the ROE a little bit clearer for us to deal with. But in terms of dealing with the moral consequences of lethality, it was really on-the-job training. I never sat down and had a formal course or formal academics with it. A lot of times it's sitting around with buddies afterwards and going, I dropped a 2,000-pound weapon through the weather. I don't know where it hit. I dropped it on coordinates that were given to me by somebody else. Did it hit the right target? Who was around the target at the time? Did somebody else do all the collateral damage calculations to make sure that we were minimizing loss there? Another experience that was educational to me is I did a short stint with the Army on the ground in Iraq in 2007. So I got to see combat from 6 feet 1 inches AGL in close proximity. And it was a much different perspective in terms of warfighting and then understanding the consequences of actions from that perspective. Again, which all goes to say it was on the job training more than anything else. I think the special ops community and SimSAF will help me out on this one. I think special ops and the RPA community are starting to address, or doing a good job of addressing the concept of moral injury, which addresses the consequences of that morality and that in the face of lethality. I suspect the Army is ahead of it as well, and I base that on my experiences in 2007 in Iraq with the Army unit. I suspect a lot of that is right of event. I'm not sure what we do left of event to prepare people for dealing with those consequences. And through the course of my career, I've seen them played out a few times. Either people concerned about going on a combat deployment because of the impacts that it's going to have, or people not wanting to take certain assignments out of pilot training because they didn't like the mission. They preferred to do something that was more, less lethal. I'll leave it at that. And to have those conversations, which I think are healthy to have, but they probably just need to happen a little bit earlier. So I've rambled all the way around, but to get to the excellent question, and none of these are going to be anything but blinding statements of the obvious. First, we need to talk about it. And I think there's different forums in which we can have these conversations, but to have, for me, the direct experience with people that had lived it or were going through it or were having those inner dialogues about the morality of lethality. And then to think about it as a person, and to lay that against your own concepts of morality and legality. And I'll also throw out maybe one caution with this as well. And this, again, came from experience with the Army and talking to others. We have to be careful about using the mask of proximity because often I've seen people, when you're dealing with, employing munitions from long range or looking at something on a 6x6 screen above your right knee where everything is electronic, and you can see the effects and you can somewhat mask the impact that it's going to have on you or the understanding of what's happening, 4.2 miles away as a 500-pound weapon goes to the door of a building. Or you can mask it because your proximity away from a trigger puller, you're doing something else in the chain that provides that information. I would caution about using that proximity as a mask or a separation. I think we don't know what the next fight is going to look like or how that's going to be conducted. I think we need to go through in our own mind just the consequences of our actions and our relationships to the delivery of lethal fires. So not to be a downer or to bring a heavy pall over this, but it was an excellent question and one that I think that we need to continue to pursue. But I'll open it up to my panel members for any of their thoughts as well.
Sir, I'll just add one piece. You mentioned the SOF piece. I think SOF does a really good job. For my two assignments with Special Ops, we do a really good job getting right to it, but we haven't always done that in the RPA community, and we're learning from that. Simsif may have some thoughts too, as he was an airman for a long time and he participated in lots of those missions. But the other thing I'll tell you is our Secretary of the Air Force is really focused on that resiliency piece and the readiness piece on, are today's airmen and guardians ready mentally for what future warfare and that high-end fight might look like? And so we've got a lot of initiatives to help be really thoughtful in getting us there.
You will fail at the margins of your experience. The more you talk, real talk about this ugly part of our business, the better equipped you'll be. You will never be ready. 19 deployments, 1,400 days of my career spent in faraway places, including three times on the ground in Afghanistan. You'll never be ready. You won't be. But the more effort that you put into building genuine relationships where you can have real conversations before, during, and after, it matters, because this is the profession you chose. And it is noble, and it is ancient, and it is sometimes ugly. And so I just encourage you to have the courage and have the relationships to have those discussions, and do your best to prepare for something that, frankly, is in many ways not something anyone could ever prepare for.
Thank you all. Now we move into our next question for Chief Bass.
Hello, I am C3C Kelsey Monaghan-Berkson from Cadet Squadron 6. My question is, how do we capitalize on our uniquely American strength of diversity to outthink, outcompete, and out-innovate our adversaries while illustrating the direct tie to our strategic objectives and operational imperatives?
Hey, great question. I think we do that right now, right? I'm super proud of our United States military writ large. If you look across this room, we are a diverse force, right? I guess I would offer a couple thoughts. You know, when I think about capitalizing on the diversity of our force, I think about diversity kind of in three ways, right? Certainly there's the goodness and the demographic diversity. And we see that, you know, physically, we can see the goodness of the demographic diversity. But the other diversity that I think, the other two that I might offer are warfighting imperatives, is a diversity of our experiences and the cognitive diversity that everybody brings to the fight. And so if we are going to posture ourselves to be ready for what future conflict might hold, then we've got to tap in to the previous speaker last hour talked about superpowers. We've got to tap into the superpowers, the talents, the strengths that every single one of those who wear this uniform have. And that's the beauty of diversity. And every one of us is going to play a role in helping to prepare our force to be ready for whatever that high-end fight might look like. We've got to tap into it. And I think, again, if we can offer some thought to the goodness of the demographic diversity along with the experiences and along with the cognitive piece, the better of a force we will be. I'm trying to answer these quick because I want to get to some of those questions.
All right, our next question is for General Saltzman.
Hello, I'm C1C Michael Prater from Cadet Squadron 3. And my question is, how does the Space Force leverage existing military wisdom without restricting itself to existing military doctrine and policies? Similarly, how do we balance unfamiliar territory, such as a much larger officer to enlisted ratio in a much smaller overall force, with decades of military expertise and wisdom?
Leave it to the Space Force to squeeze two questions into one. Love it, love it. It's a great question. It's something Chief Toberman and I talk about all the time. You know, we have this unique opportunity standing up a new force to say, okay, how do we want to do this? Like, what are the basic processes? Somebody really wise told me one time, if you want something new, you can't really rely on old processes. You know, you have to do things, you have to think differently about it to get a new thing in place, a new product, a new outcome. And I think there's a lot of expectations on the Space Force to innovate, to take advantage of our size and see if we can be an incubator for new ways of doing talent management or new ways of buying weapon systems, and prove out those concepts and see if the rest of the Department of Defense can follow our lead if we prove something to be successful. So we take that very seriously, but it's a lot easier said than done. The military is all about standard operating procedures, military decision-making process, right? I mean, joint planning process. We love a good procedure. We love doing things in a routine way over and over and over again. It's hard to think that way and innovate. And I've given orders a lot, and every time I give an order to innovate, it doesn't seem to work out. You know, be creative I'm not sure that's a viable order for most people. And so how do you do it? Well, you look back at things that you know have worked well, and you say, hey, did the Air Force get this right? Does the Army have this correct? And you say, and then if they do, if they're happy with the results they're getting, does that translate to the Space Force? Do we have something unique? So all I'm saying is we're challenging the assumptions. We're critically thinking about process and outcome to make sure it fits. And we steal everything that we can. We have to go too fast. It would be silly if we didn't take what other services have already figured out that does work for the Space Force and adopt it so we can go faster. But we feel a real responsibility to not press the easy button and say, you know, we grew up in the Air Force. We know Air Force processes. It would be really easy to say, okay, let's take that process and we'll nibble in the margins and maybe find some incremental improvements that we think maybe are better, but we're basically gonna continue with Air Force processes. And it turns out that let's just use personnel processes. Personnel processes that are required for a service of over 300,000 people start to look different and feel different when you're talking about 8,000 people. It's just fundamentally different. And so we owe it to the service to take a look and challenge those assumptions and find something else. And so the only way I can answer the question is say, acknowledge that there is a lot of wisdom that's currently being executed by all of our services in the Department of Defense. And you have to examine it. You have to look at it critically. You have to challenge assumptions. You have to understand the personal and individual circumstances that our service brings, and then see if it scales, see if it scales down, see if it translates. And where it doesn't, you have a remarkable opportunity to do something different. And then you have to have the courage to be bold and strike out and do that different thing. And I don't use the word courage, I don't throw that around lightly, but it really does take courage to put your reputation on the line and say, we're gonna do this differently. And I'm hopeful that it's gonna work out. I think it's the right way to go, but I'm willing to stake my personal reputation behind it. That takes something. That's not inconsequential. So I'm lucky to have a good wingman here that lets me think out loud with him. And we say, this might be a good way of approaching this. Do we have what it takes to try it? And then commit ourselves to the second part of this question, enlisted officer ratios. I want to broaden that out and just say, what really matters is, are we committed to being a learning organization? We're in the second semester here of the academic year, so I know everybody here has been around long enough to know what the OODA loop is. And, right? Yeah, raise your hand. So observe, orient, decide, act, and it's a loop, it's not a chain, which means then you continually start the observations over. It means you're going to be dedicated to learning, fixing mistakes, evolve, evaluate. And so I'm not afraid to try something different because I know we'll just fix it in the next iteration if we need to. And so I think that's the balance, is not creating so much turmoil with the force, but still having the courage to kind of strike out and do things differently because we have that opportunity.
And, sorry, go ahead, sir.
Well, just real quick, I think, because apropos to the last question, a life and death business requires a certain amount of rigor, like it's required. And so doctrine and policy are required to get that right. Most important, though, is if the philosophy that you choose, whether you have blind adherence to doctrine, that's when you start to fail. So we just got to continually challenge while we apply rigor to a life and death business.
I'll tell you, we're paying attention, right? The Air Force is paying attention to the Space Force and hoping you all will succeed in lessons learned that, at scale may be useful to all of us. I joke about it all the time. Like, sometimes I wish I was Chief Toberman, because if we were setting up the Space Force, we would take no IT systems with us, right? Like, it's challenging, right? Like, mil PDS, what? Yeah, we're still doing this, and so I would offer, right, you all have an opportunity, and we are paying attention to how we might scale that.
Great.
They're too young to know about mil PDS, but it's still a thing.
And General Saltzman, sir, this next question is also for you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm C4C Kaiman Sway from Cadet Squadron 9. My question is, when you were our age, what lessons did you learn from extracurricular activities such as sports or clubs that are still relevant to your career today?
Yeah, that's great. First on the kind of the sports side of things, these are lessons that everybody says they've learned, but I think they're meaningful. Fundamentals matter. Practice perfect makes you perfect, not just practice, right? All those kind of just basic skills, blocking and tackling, all of that matters when you're actually trying to execute. You get it to be muscle memory. That works for both mental skills as well as physical skills in my experience. The team is always more important than the individual. I remember vividly coming home from a basketball game, and I was all proud because I had scored the most points for the team in a loss, and my dad let me have it, right? Because what good is it that you accomplish something individually when the goal was to have the team come out with a win? And I think everybody has to kind of learn those lessons as they grow up, that it is the team that matters, and that's what's most important. And you could have a miserable game, and it doesn't matter if you contributed in the team and the team comes out victorious. The last thing I think I would offer is never underestimate what energy and effort can accomplish. Sometimes it's just about getting after it. And underwhelming teams, when you see them warming up and you think, oh, this is going to be easy, and then they come out with unbelievable energy and effort, and you're like, what is going on here? Like, we should win this easily. We're far more talented. And the talent turns out to not nearly be as important as the energy and effort that goes into the competition. And so that's an important lesson, I think, from sports that I've pulled forward. Just, hey, let's get after it. I think just showing up sometimes is half the battle. Other extracurriculars, there's so many great leadership lessons in clubs, and I tell, in fact, I'll probably tell this later today because it's one of my favorite lessons, is the most important job I had as a lieutenant was to be a snacko. You know, yeah, laugh if you want, but you learn a lot of good lessons.
You do.
Right? You got to manage money. You've got a really angry, hangry customer base. You've got to learn about supply chain. You've got to learn about, there's a lot of things that go into it. And if you get it wrong, you hear about it with some very brutal feedback. And so all the lessons of leadership are right there. The good news is that the stakes are relatively low. And so you get a chance to make those mistakes. You get a chance to learn from them. And so you can internalize them pretty much. And so I think all of those things, those extracurriculars, those additional duties, the things you tackle along the way, if you keep your mind open to the experience, you can really learn some valuable lessons.
And our next question is for Chief Toberman.
I am Cadet First Class Haley Dion of Cadet Squadron 32. My question is, what would you identify as the most standout barriers across the levels of leadership in our forces that stand in our way of eradicating the problems of sexual harassment and sexual violence? And then, what would you say to our airmen and guardians to compel them to overcome these barriers to establish a better climate?
Another twofer. You know, I think, one barrier is right there in the question. This is a human problem. This is not for leadership to solve. Like, we can't be everywhere at all times. One of the biggest obstacles we have is that we can't figure this out. Like, how do we get people to stop hurting each other? Like, you lose sleep over it. Because all we want for all of you is for you to be fulfilled, to be successful, to be happy, to be respected, to have great relationships with each other. That's what we want. And so I think that's a big barrier for us, is that there's some degree of helplessness that we've got to do our best to overcome. And then just, I think, collectively, the barrier is we can't solve this by ourselves. We all choose as human beings to be good teammates, to know that is essential to this ancient profession of ours, that we've got to work together, completely able to trust each other, completely able to put our lives in each other's hands. And you cannot do that. You cannot do that if there's even a sliver of doubt. Even a sliver of doubt. And so all of us need to have those relationships. And all of us need to look for the tiniest deviation and then gracefully call it out and go, wait a minute, I don't know if you realized what just happened here, but this is what I've seen, and this is how it made me feel, and this is how I think you could have done that better. And that if we address that with each other along that entire spectrum, but importantly early on, especially for you all, and you're as old as I am, like, you guys got a lot to figure out, I promise. You're finding your way, and that's beautiful. Like, find it out together. Don't force each other to find it out through trial and error where horrible things go wrong, right? Get together and have real conversations and help each other figure this out together. Stay so far away from where harm is done that it's never a doubt in anyone's mind. Thanks for the easy 2 questions.
All right, and for our last video question, we look to General Schneider.
Hi, my name is Cadet First Class Christopher Winters, and I'm from Squadron 37. My question is, what is the United States doing to prepare for future conflict with our adversaries, such as Russia and China? And does the United States have an Achilles heel in the next decade of potential future global conflict?
All right, keeping the string of twofer questions going. I will do my best part to answer it. I will probably swim into General Saltzman's swim lane. I may ask him for some help at the end. But I'll also endeavor to kind of keep this brief because it is a complex answer. First and foremost, I'd say at the geostrategic level, allies and partners are key. You know, when we look at what's going on around the world, the United States is not going to do something in isolation or by itself. And we can deep dive onto this on the margins or later, but take a look at what's going on with the war in Ukraine and how NATO came together for all the challenges of a consensus organization as it is to galvanize to deal with the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I think sends a very positive and a very strong message. At the same time, I look at the Pacific, where I have a little bit more experience and background, and for all of China's malign activity over the last few years, you're starting to see more and more steeling of steel, S-T-E-E-L, of resolve amongst allies and partner in the region to stand up more to the malign activities out there. So I am encouraged by the continued engagement that we have with allies and partners, and I look at General Brown and CIMSAF's schedules and what they do with allies and partners. And I know General Saltzman spent the initial portion of his, when he took the flag as the CSO, on the road, building and continuing to strengthen those relationships, as well as Chief Toberman. Maybe at the next level down for what the Department of the Air Force is doing, and I'm definitely getting into General Saltzman's lane now, but when the Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary Kendall, came on board, he recognized with very clear eyes the challenges posed particularly by the People's Republic of China. So he came in with 7 operational imperatives. I won't go through all the details, but these are the 7 warfighting capabilities that he feels we must have to win in a fight, or ideally to deter a fight from happening, but if deterrence failed, to win. And there's 7 big things. There's a lot of subsets and a lot of pieces and parts to each of those programs that involves advanced capabilities that are setting us up for success. But it has forced the Department of the Air Force to make some hard, important, but hard decisions about how and where we spend our money to build that future force that we need. And I'll just briefly touch on the last point, and then let me turn it over to General Saltzman. The Achilles heel. I wouldn't look at it as an Achilles heel. I will throw out one thing just to prove that I did go to a war college. The one thing I do remember from Marine Corps War College was, wars are a conflict between societies, and not to get all Sun Tzu on you, but knowing the enemy and knowing ourselves, I would maybe characterize this as more of a question mark. Do we, as I look at the American society today, are we able to align ourselves in the face of a conflict against a peer or a near peer adversary, understanding all the sacrifices that would be demanded of our nation and as our society as a whole? So again, not an Achilles heel, just more of a question mark in terms of where we are as a nation and a society. But let me turn it over to General Saltzman.
Yeah, thanks, Gumby. I'll just add a little bit because he covered the basics. First, you'll hear us talk about modernization issues. You'll hear us talk about readiness issues. But that's relative to ourselves and what we know we're capable of. Make no bones about it. You are joining the greatest military on the planet and in the history of mankind. That's the military you're joining. We travel all the time. I talk to foreign leaders from all over, as many countries as you can think. Every single one of them, and I include our strategic competitors, if you will, every single one of them would trade everything they have militarily wise for everything we have. Absolutely. You would not start the game of Risk if you didn't have this military. I promise you. So, are we pivoting from a counter VEO fight that we've been engaged in for a long time in the military? Absolutely. Is transition tough? Absolutely. Do we have readiness and modernization issues, and is it expensive to build the military that we've come to expect? Absolutely. Are we making those decisions? Yes, we are. And it's relative to what we expect of our military. So when you hear us talk about readiness issues, I promise you, it's only because we know what's possible of this team, not because we're counting ourselves against a strategic competitor. So you should be very proud of the military you're joining. And again, you would not want to be on any other side of this fight if it comes to it.
Can I add one alibi? You know, that is honestly because of the strength of our people. You know, sir, you talked about how we spend time with our partner nations. Chief Toberman was with us in August when I hosted a Senior Enlisted Leader International Summit. So 60 Chief Master Sergeants of the Air Force came out to DC and spent about a week with us. And we talked about warfighting, we talked about leadership development. And what was pretty cool was a couple days before that event, the Chief Master Sergeant of the Ukrainian Air Force actually crossed the border in Poland so that he could come out and spend time with us. And we weren't sure what he was going to be able to say with respects to what was going on in Ukraine at that time. But here's what he shared, and most of us who study and understand what's going on in Ukraine, right, we didn't think that it would last as long as it has. I mean, we just hit the kind of 1 year piece, if you will, but this was August time frame where our Ukrainian teammates really have been going strong. And so he gave us about a 1 hour vignette of what is going on from his perspective and how their Air Force is still powering through. And he said one powerful thing. He said in that room with 60 of his colleagues, he said, "We will win this war because of the strength of our sergeants." Like, that's a powerful statement, but that didn't just happen by happenstance. That is because back in 2014 with the annex of Crimea, their state partnership, the California Air National Guard and the Army Guard, spent some time training with our teammates in Ukraine, right? And that mattered, the teaching them about mission command, teaching them about empowerment, teaching them reps and sets. And so this force really has learned how to empower their folks at the most junior level to have the grit and the leadership reps that they're gonna need, and they're still in the fight and they're still going strong. The opposite is what is going on with Russia. And so lots of great leadership lessons there, but we are the world's greatest military because of all of our people. Y'all ought to hand clap for that one.
Thank you, panelists, for your candid discussion. All of the lessons you've shared with us today are invaluable to the cadets in this room as we prepare to commission into the Air and Space Forces. And now I'll turn it back to Cadet Temple.
Senior leaders, thank you for your time today. Your experiences and perspective speak to how we can reimagine leadership and inspire teamwork. This concludes our session. We encourage you to stop by our testimonial booth on the south side of the Arnold Hall foyer, where you can record an audio or video review of this session and your overall thoughts on NCLS 2023. Cadets, please check in for this session using the posted QR code. Thank you and have a great NCLS day.
We're out of time. Thanks, y'all.